Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You will hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to have a very special guest today, Dr. Brian Noland, who's the president of East Tennessee State University, where he's been at the helm since 2012. And under his visionary leadership, the university has really made some significant strides in supporting and revitalizing rural communities in his part of Tennessee. He really has an understanding of the fears and concerns that many rural families have about the future of their children, and he's been a steadfast advocate for the transformative power of higher education. In addition to his role at ETSU, Dr. Noland is a prominent voice in the national conversation about rural education and economic development. And his recent article that was published in the Daily Yonder called Setting Up a Successful Comeback highlights his commitment to strengthening local communities through strategic investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And we're going to dive into that in a little bit here. His work on initiatives like for the Future and ETSU's Grow Your Own programs really demonstrate his dedication to preparing students at ETSU for critical roles in their home communities, as well as addressing the teacher shortage in rural schools. So, Dr. Noland, I'm just really thrilled to be able to have a discussion with you today about the work that you're doing at ETSU, and I welcome you to the Rural Scoop.
Thank you. And I look forward to the conversation and the opportunity to spotlight not only the work that we're doing here, but the importance of work that's occurring across the country to serve students and sections of our nation that quite often are overlooked and forgotten.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really excited to dive into that. But before we do, can you give us an idea of what your leadership journey has been from where you started out to now being the president of East Tennessee State University?
Well, I've had the great honor to serve in a variety of public settings throughout my career. Degrees from two land-grant institutions, West Virginia University and the University of Tennessee. And as part of that land-grant mission, those institutions place significant emphasis on the needs of rural communities in two states in the nation's South. Worked for the state's coordinating board in Tennessee. Right out of graduate school, had the opportunity to be a part of the formation of some programs focused on rural communities. Wrote the first Gear Up grant for the state of Tennessee that served the needs of rural regions across the state. Played a role in the development of a broad merit-based aid program that has now been in existence for about 20 years, providing financial opportunities for students to realize their dreams by attending college. Then went to West Virginia and served as the system chancellor, head of a coordinating/governing board that oversaw that state's post-secondary system. Had a chance to be a part of some financial aid efforts, as well as once again launching a Gear Up program, meeting the needs of rural students. And then from West Virginia, moved here to Johnson City about 12 and a half years ago, and I've had the honor to serve in capacity of president of East Tennessee State University now for the better part of more than a decade.
Oh, that's quite a ride. You've done a lot.
Well,
So
it doesn't seem like it's been that many years, but it's been that many years.
I want to start off by framing our conversation around those key areas that you pointed out in the article that I mentioned in the Daily Yonder. That was just this last February. What inspired you to write that article on strengthening rural communities, and what's the response been from your efforts to really elevate that concern in the national conversation?
Well, I think there have been a number of elements that kind of provide support for the need for individuals, particularly in states such as Tennessee, to draw a greater focus on the needs of rural communities. As we were moving through the middle part of the last decade, the state of Tennessee had launched Tennessee Promise, had launched Reconnect. Promise provided opportunities for students to attend community college at no cost. Reconnect was bringing adults with some college but no degree back into the portfolio. And we really saw college going rates in the state of Tennessee beginning to really move in the right direction, particularly college going rates at places like our TCATs that train individuals for job-related skills right after high school, job-related skills that are central in rural communities. Then the pandemic happens and we come out of the backside of the pandemic and you see college going rates beginning to plummet. You see the challenges that families are facing now with the FAFSA. And then for a variety of reasons, as you look at public opinion data, and you've got to take polls with a grain of salt, but polls are beginning to show that Americans, particularly rural Americans, are starting to question the value of a return on an investment in higher education for their future as well as for their children's future. So it was a combination of those factors that really caused me to sit down with staff and talk through what we could do strategically as a university to begin to very publicly spotlight the importance of post-secondary education for families in communities such as the community that we call home here in Johnson City.
So, we all know that our schools serve as hubs of communities, especially in our rural places. And there is that workforce development component that links them and intersects some of the things that are happening at the school with the local community businesses or those kinds of things. Can you talk about how ETSU is collaborating with local businesses to support economic revitalization in those areas through your education programming initiatives?
So I can provide a couple of examples. And the first is work that we've done with business and industry in the healthcare space to design pipeline programs that meet emerging and current workforce needs. Our local healthcare system, Ballot Health, which spans a multitude of states, but is primarily existent in rural communities. Here in Northeast Tennessee, Johnson City is a city, but for many places in America, Johnson City would be a rural small town. So Ballot reaches across an Appalachian network of counties in Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee, significant nursing challenges. So we have worked with Ballot to build pipeline programs that move students from 9th grade to 12th grade, LPN to BSN, and then right into our nursing programs here at the institution. We've also worked with Blue Cross Blue Shield to create a program called Blue Sky, where we are taking what is a computer science program in healthcare informatics, compressing that from 4 years to 2.5.
Wow.
We're teaching classes in the corporate offices of Blue Cross Blue Shield. The training modules that are embedded into the curricula directly relate to workforce needs at Blue Cross. Blue Cross is covering all of the cost of tuition for these students, and then they have a guaranteed job on the back end. And the students that have been identified for the first 2 cohorts are first generation low income. So what we have found here is that for the major employers in rural communities, which are healthcare systems and schools, the more that we can develop formal pipelines with those entities, the better. And I want to talk a little bit about the schools. About 1.5 years ago, we brought together all the superintendents across the region, as well as the post-secondary institutions. So the community college and a couple of small private schools in our area, and formed a P20 council where the presidents and the superintendents are talking about workforce needs, counselor needs, financial aid challenges. But the more we can bring people together to identify shared priorities, then you can start to identify shared solutions. Because in a rural community, all of it's intertwined. 80% of the people with a baccalaureate degree who live within 30 miles of this campus graduated from ETSU. The predominance of the teachers, the counselors, the nurses, the physicians, the small business leaders, the bankers, the butchers, they all graduated from here.
Right.
And this is a region where we are seeing some population growth of retirees, but the primary way through which rural communities solve their problems is by working together with their local institutions, because The students who are in second and third grade are your future workforce.
Let's transition to that teacher recruitment and retention piece that you mentioned. What are you seeing as the barriers in that teacher recruitment, not only to the school system itself as a desirable career choice, but getting them into ETSU's programming? And how have you tried to mitigate those challenges?
So we've been fortunate going back to the founding of the institution. We were, to go back 110 plus years, the state of Tennessee at the beginning of the last century recognized the importance of education to raise the economic potential of rural communities. So in 1910 and 11, the state passed something called the Normal School Act to create 3 colleges across the 3 grand divisions of the state to educate teachers to go into underserved areas to raise educational attainment levels, thereby raising economic potential and income levels in those communities. So this has been part of the fabric of the university since we were founded in 1911. Our founding president stated that the mission of the university is to improve the quality of life for the people of our region. So we're fortunate to have 110 years plus of relationships with local school districts. And we've used that rich history and tradition to ensure that we've got a sense of their workforce needs, of their labor needs, and how we can start to plug those gaps. What we're seeing is that the challenge isn't convincing students to major in education. We've had pretty strong and robust demand from early grades all the way to high school to, certifications on the administrative side. It's just the salary potential. When students can go to a county maybe an hour and a half away that is a little bit more urban with a higher earnings potential, it's hard for them to say, I'm going to pass on making $70,000 in Smith County to stay here in Jones County and make 45. And we're in an area where there are rural communities, but a couple hours away, there are urban communities where the comp is just significantly higher. And for a student coming right out of college, compensation is significant.
Have you been able to entice your students to stay? I mean, that's one of the issues I think that rural communities face nationally, is that there is that draw, the brain drain for our graduates to go to the big city where they can make that money. Are you able to work with your businesses and local communities to try to draw them back?
Yeah, there's a real sense of commitment to empowering local communities through education and through investments in education. We're fortunate in our area to have 2 large community foundations whose work is centered in this space. The Ayers Foundation, which is led by Jim and Janet Ayers, provides last dollar scholarships for students to attend the institutions of their choice. And they've got a rich network of bringing those alumni back home into emerging workforce needs in rural counties. So the Ayers Foundation started in Decatur County, Tennessee, which is West Tennessee in between Nashville and Memphis near Jackson. And at its time, they were one of the first of the last dollar scholarships, particularly last dollar scholarships in rural communities for an entire county. That's now spread into other counties across the state. And in our area, there's a county adjacent to our campus called Unicoi County, where the Ayers Foundation has made that possible. So Jim and Janet Ayers have 20 years worth of data on accountants, on physicians, on school teachers, on chemists. And as businesses have opportunities that emerge from a workforce perspective, they're able to partner with the Ayers Foundation to touch that database, and they can send then a contact to Mr. Smith to say, Mr. Smith, there's a job back home. Would you be interested? So we're fortunate to have a community foundation in that realm. We've got another large community foundation called the Niswonger Foundation that has really been a driver of innovation in the education space in the state of Tennessee for a number of years. And the Niswonger Scholars Program provides full scholarships to up to 7 to 10 students per year, depending upon funding. And one of the requirements of the receipt of that is that students have to come back in service to Northeast Tennessee. So I'm aware of multiple physicians, high school teachers, accountants, dentists, pharmacists, who all now live in rural Northeast Tennessee because of the investments that the Niswonger Foundation made in their education. And part of that investment was a return to service to this region. So we're fortunate to have those two community foundations that are engaged in this space. But for us, and I apologize for such a long answer to a short question, this is really missional. Our College of Medicine is now celebrating its 50th anniversary. It was founded to create physicians to go into rural communities for family practice. And we're nationally ranked year after year in the top 20 for producing physicians to go into general family practice and with a rural focus. Our College of Public Health has a rural focus on its service, its outreach, its research. So we built this in missionally to the operational aspects of the institution. And as a result, I think we've developed a sense of gravitas in the community. One of the things in rural communities is a real skepticism about outsiders. Well, we're not viewed as outsiders. We're part of the community by default.
That's an interesting perception. And you're right. I've seen that myself here in my home state of Arizona, where people coming into rural places, it takes a while for them to adjust for themselves, but also for the community to adjust to them. Can you?
And a quick story there, in my former role as Assistant Chancellor in West Virginia, one of the things that I was intentional about was to get out into small towns and small schools all across the state. Mm-hmm. And never forget the first time I went to visit this little elementary school in Lincoln County, West Virginia. And pretty long drive around curvy roads. It took 2 hours to go 60 miles. But before we went to the school, I had stopped at a gas station with the person I was traveling with and said, I'd like to get Diet Coke and make sure my batteries are recharged before I go in and spend time in the school. So we got our stuff, got back in the car. And when we got to the school, folks were outside waiting on us. And I said, well, how did you know we were coming? And they said, well, the people from the gas station called and let us know that the auditors were on the way because they thought you were auditors from the state. We were from the outside. And that was a wonderful reminder for me that you've got to build trust. And, in that little school, I went back month after month after month over a 6-year time period. And for 6 years, did the things that I did in that school. And by the time we left, you were no longer the outside, you were one of us. So I tell that by design here. We are purposefully in the schools. I, each fall, get into high schools all across this region. And I talk to students about the importance of college, not ETSU, but 2-year, 4-year, public, private. It doesn't matter where you go to college, go. For our students who go to the TCAT and get a welding certification, that welding certification puts them in a position to get at the head of the line as jobs become available. Auto diesel, CAD CAM, cosmetology, that's college. And those are bedrock business and industries in rural communities. But in many rural communities, when people think of college, they think of the University of Arizona, and they think that's not for me. What I try to drive home, and this is the local trust and the local respect, is college is everything from the small technical and trade school in your backyard all the way to the big university. It doesn't matter where you go, you need to go. But you got to come back time and time and time again, because if you're a one-time flash in the pan, no one's going to take you seriously. Investments in rural communities take time because they're people and relational dependent.
Very well said. Can you elaborate on the economic impact of college-educated individuals in our rural communities?
I can, we're all familiar with the stats that, if you go to college, you make $1.5 million more over the course of your lifetime. College graduates who make their homes in rural communities, depending upon the state tax structure, probably contribute $250,000 in tax benefits over the course of their lifetime to that community. But it's more than dollars. We're familiar with the stats of if you have a college degree, you're going to live 8 years longer than those without a college degree. But when I look at the impact that individuals who are community leaders have on their communities, many of them are folks with advanced degrees. If you're in a rural community and you go to a physician, that physician is doing more than healing whatever your wound may be. That person is also probably family counselor and advisor. And that may be one of the few people that students in a rural community see who had a chance to go to college and come back. So it's more than just the economic return on an investment. It's the return that those individuals have as community leaders in the communities that they end up calling their home. They're the folks who serve on the Chamber of Commerce. They serve on, the Kiwanis Club boards. They're the people who take time to give back because they're purposely focused on the needs of others rather than the needs of self. And I'm not saying those without a college degree aren't as altruistic as well, but in rural communities, the opportunity for people to dream bigger dreams is real. And when I've spent time in rural communities, which I do almost every day of the week, it's the ability for people to dream bigger dreams for themselves and for their families.
What are the primary challenges that ETSU faces when they are working with rural students to access higher education? And how have you worked to overcome those barriers? Because they are real.
Well, I think one of the significant barriers is just breaking through what is the false narrative about higher education. For whatever reason, this generation, particularly males in this generation, in our region, the college going rate's less than 50%. In our region, the college going rate for men is, in some respects, 30% or less. So 70% of men in many of the rural counties in Northeast Tennessee aren't going to college at all. They've set themselves at age 18 along an economic path that is going to be much more turbulent than the 30% who went. But they made that decision not to go based on a narrative. And that narrative is don't go to college because if you do, you're going to go in debt, you're going to live in your parents' basement, you're going to end up working at Starbucks or the local restaurant, and you're going to get brainwashed. So don't go. And that narrative is real. So part of what we are intentionally doing is getting out into the communities and saying, you know what? Half the students who graduate from ETSU, more than that, it's 60%. 60% of the students who graduate from our institution have no debt at all. Of the 40% that have debt, that debt is less than the price of the used pickup truck that you're going to buy as soon as you get out of high school. Of those who go on to college, here's what their earnings potential looks like down the road. Of those that don't go to college, here's what their earnings potential looks like down the road. But then also saying college isn't just here. Particularly for young men, there's a real desire for problem solving. There's a real desire to have returns that are immediate. So I spend a significant amount of time talking about immediate returns to double your earnings potential in a very short period of time. Right now, starting wage for a lot of jobs is 15. We live in an area where there's this convenience store called Buc-ee's, and if you drive down the road, come to Buc-ee's and make $21 an hour. And what I joke with students about is, I hope you like working at Buc-ee's because that $21 is all you're ever going to make. If you want to have potential, don't limit yourself by the decisions you make now. And I do that in somewhat of a lighthearted way. And I tell the story of a family member who didn't want to go to school, who didn't enjoy online learning during COVID, but enjoyed solving problems. They went and got their welding certificate. They then went and got a specialized certificate on top of that. And at age 23, they're making $100,000 a year.
Wow.
And what they found is that in order for them to move into leadership roles at the company where they're working, they've got to go back and get their degree. And they said, you know what, now I've got to get a bachelor's degree because if I want to be the boss, I've got to have the degree. And I wish I'd listened to you, and I won't disclose who the person is, when I was younger. But the ability for students to see a little bit of education here plus a little bit here builds. That's a story we try to tell, but I tell it with local examples from local students, from local communities. And people say, you know what, this stupid guy in the bow tie, maybe he's telling the truth.
Maybe you're onto something there. So one of the unique things about ETSU is you have a high school on your campus. So you talk
Correct.
about going into high schools, you have one right out your back door. Talk a little bit about what kind of programming you're doing with the high school and how that can help integrate the mission that you're talking about with your rural community.
So when our university opened in 1911 as a normal school, a lab school was part of that institutional mission. That lab school has been on campus since we opened our doors. So it is a very small school that prepares our students in that lab environment to then go work in rural communities. So it's a school of less than 600 students, grades K through 12. And one of the beautiful aspects of the school is at commencement each year, they ask the class of 12, and that's who's been there from first grade through 12th grade, to stand. And that sense of community connections of I've been with these people since I was in the first grade, and now we're graduating from high school together. That's what you're going to find in rural communities. You know, in many rural communities across our country, students are in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. There's not a second first grade class. There's just one first grade class for the community. So we're preparing students in an environment that is not altogether dissimilar from many of the environments that exist in some of the small towns and small communities that exist around our campus here in Upper Northeast Tennessee. But we're also preparing our students to go into rural Eastern Kentucky, rural Western North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, because this is an institution that I like to think of as the land grant for Central Appalachia. We not only serve Northeast Tennessee, we serve families across those 4 states and those rural communities. So the learning experience that our students have as pre-educators is going to prepare them when they become certified educators and go out into those rural schools. And it's innovative. It's on a year-round calendar. And one of the stories that, if you go back and look at the archives of the institution, it talks about people coming in on horseback in the 1920s to look at the education innovation that was occurring at the school, because it was an atypical calendar then, Tuesday through Saturday. And they went through Saturday so that educators from around the region could come in and see what was happening in that school. We don't go on Saturdays, but we're the only school in the area that's year-round. And part of the reason why it's year-round is so that we can share those lessons learned from our lab school with other schools across Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Western North Carolina, and Eastern Kentucky.
Oh, that's really innovative. And obviously a longstanding thing that is working. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep doing it.
Yes.
So that leads me to my next question, which is about, you've talked quite a bit about grow your own programs and the role that they play in addressing teacher shortages and building that community capacity. What is ETSU doing to both implement and then support those types of programs?
Well, that's a question that we could take in a lot of different directions. So yesterday I had a chance to walk across campus in the evening and was really struck by the number of students who were on campus all wearing name tags. And I thought, okay, TRIO camp has begun. We have a full comprehensive TRIO program here. Between TRIO and Talent Search, that is one pipeline through which we're building early connections to expose students to the opportunities present at this institution and others. So you've got the longstanding federally supported programs through TRIO, Talent Search, Upward Bound, the work we do in Gear Up. So you've got that stream. We then have formal streams in the healthcare spaces. So from physical therapy, occupational therapy, medicine, nursing, all of that we directly build into the high schools so that we're working with students and we've aligned curricula pathways so that if a student wants to go into pre-health and get a job at Ballard or the VA, there's a pretty clear step of here's what you have to do from a curricular perspective. Then we're making them aware of the financial aid. We're fortunate in Tennessee through both Promise and the Lottery Scholarship to have financial aid programs to take the cost of college off the table. So all of that work is really sequenced early on, linking students to here's what would happen with degrees in those areas and jobs in those areas. We're also fortunate to have a major employer in the area, Eastman Chemical, who has long-standing needs to help make that facility run that is back mapped into the curricula. So part of this is just keeping those things current, so that you've got current business needs, current employment needs, but also recognizing the currency of curricula change. In rural communities during COVID, there's significant learning loss, and that's learning loss for a generation. So we've got to adjust our curricula to remediate the learning loss that transpired, because the last thing we want to do is send students into our local employers. And that's a relationship. If you've got a bad class, that employer is going to remember that bad class. So much of this is symbiotic in that nature on that path. And then I think that the final path is the work that we're doing to help recruit new business and industry to the region. Our Small Business Development Center, the soft landings work that we do out at something called the Innovations Lab, which is a business incubation center. But we've started something called the ETSU Research Corporation to help our faculty take the ideas that are emerging in their research labs and spin that potentially into business and industry that may start as a small 5 to 10 person company that then grows into a 20 to 30 company that maybe then grows from there. So there's the research side of it, there's the employment side of it, there's the pipeline side of it. I mean, for us, this just isn't a series of one-offs. Across every facet of the institution, everything is focused on the mission of serving the people of the region.
What's interesting about the focus on small business, and I'm sure that you're seeing some growth in entrepreneurship then in your communities. How does that play into economic well-being?
We are, not only from an entrepreneurship perspective, but providing opportunities for businesses who are looking for a safe, affordable place to put down roots and open whatever their location may be, to open that location here. So our staff, myself included, are hand in glove with the chamber to ensure that as they're recruiting companies to our region, we're part of that recruitment work. In fact, 4 or 5 years ago, when the chamber in Johnson City was looking to relocate their offices, they were moving into a renovated building. We helped cost share that renovation. And I literally moved our advancement services and our alumni operations into a space that we're right across the hall. So that way, if the Johnson City Chamber is bringing in the Smith & Jones Company to look at relocating to our region, boom, right across the hall is our alumni office, our advancement office, and it's symbiotic.
That's strategic planning in action.
And that has begun to yield fruit.
Yeah. One of the unique things about Tennessee is the For the Future campaign. Can you talk a little bit about what that is for those that are outside of Tennessee? And then how does that campaign align with the university's mission and goals that you've been talking about?
So one of the things that the public universities in the state of Tennessee recognized, both late stages of the pandemic and post-pandemic, was this real sense of question in the general public about what is the value of a college degree and how do our colleges serve the needs of the state of Tennessee. And as presidents, we spent a significant time together talking about how we could work strategically across the 3 grand divisions of the state and the 10 public institutions that span from Northeast Tennessee all the way to the Mississippi border at the University of Memphis. How could we work collectively, not individually, but collectively, to tell the story of the important role that universities play in the past, present, and future of the state of Tennessee? So from those conversations, and I really want to thank Randy Boyd, the system president of UT, for helping to drive some of this, the institutions came together and contributed resources to launch a public outreach campaign around the importance of post-secondary education and messaging things like, we educate your teachers, we educate your farmers, we educate your nurses, and a systems approach driving home that it's the universities that are the backbone of the state's economy. And that campaign has begun to gain some traction, but I think it really speaks to the collaborative nature of the university, because this was self-funded. This wasn't state-funded. It was self-funded, that we all came together and said, rather than being defensive, let's be aggressive in telling our story about how we impact the lives of people on a daily basis. Because there's not a school in this state that isn't full of graduates from one of the public universities based here in the state of Tennessee. And you can say likewise for Nebraska, Iowa, West Virginia, South Dakota. It's the public universities that truly are the backbone of those states' economies.
So following up on that, from that 10,000-foot view, what are some things that those higher, both in Tennessee and outside of the state as well, with other higher education institutions, how can they better support the overall quality of life in rural communities?
I think for that question to then be the question that's asked day after day after day in meetings with deans, with faculty, with alumni is, are the things we're doing impacting the communities and the students that we call home? And if that is your central focus, then that central focus will, in short order, start to change outcomes and perceptions. You know, if you were to ask a person in rural America right now, what's happening on a college campus? They're going to talk about things that they're seeing in the media. That's not what's happening on most college campuses. What's happening on most college campuses, our students are going to class, they're preparing themselves for career. The bulk of our students have full or part-time jobs that they're using to help support the pursuit and aspiration of their dreams. Our students have internships, but their work is here. So just reminding people that the things that are happening in the majority of colleges across the country, and that's everything from an auto diesel school to a cosmetology school to a major research institution, the bulk of that's preparing students to get degrees, to go out in the community and make a difference.
When you think about the future of rural education and how it might evolve over the course of the next year, 5 years, next decade, what are the trends or the developments that you anticipate are going to help shape what the future of rural education looks like?
Well, I think one of the first trends is the need for us as institutions to address the pipeline challenges that exist in the teacher workforce in rural communities, particularly in areas like STEM and special education. There are significant labor gaps, and if we don't help address those labor gaps, then that'll have long-term implications on the pipeline production from an economic workforce perspective. So it's ensuring that we have elements aligned properly to the extent that we can to ensure that we've got highly qualified teachers in every school across our region. I think the next is to recognize that the learning gaps from the pandemic are going to be generational, and we've got to work through that until we've cycled this generation through the pipeline. But then how can we learn from aspects of the online experience to help supplement instructional gaps in local schools? Whether we like it or not, students are used to an online environment. I don't think an online environment is the solution to rural education, but I think online environments can supplement gaps to extents possible. So, looking at emerging technology, looking at shifting demands, but recognizing that many of the challenges that face rural communities now are the same challenges that faced rural communities in 1911 when our university was formed. There weren't enough teachers. Educational conditions were lagging. Healthcare conditions were lagging. And the solution to the challenges facing rural communities in 1911, I think, is the same solution to the challenges facing rural communities in 2024 or in 2036. It exists in our teachers and what our teachers do in the classroom every day. So how can we celebrate our teachers? How can we support our teachers? And how can we ensure that they're properly compensated? Our governor, Governor Lee, has a real focus on rural communities in the state. And he's made it his goal that by the end of his administration, that every teacher in every county across the state of Tennessee, at a minimum, is going to make $50,000. If we can get there, that would be a heavy lift, and that would be a wonderful mission accomplished.
What advice would you give to other higher education leaders that are looking to support rural communities in their states?
My advice would be simple. It would be to get off campus, to get out into small town America, to walk the streets, to talk to the business owners, to go to the high schools. When your college has a college career or FAFSA night, go. Don't go in your suit. Go to listen, go to volunteer, go to answer questions. If you have the opportunity to speak to the high school, go speak to the junior, senior class. If there are 5 students from a rural high school who you know you're going to give scholarships to, bring them up on stage and celebrate them, and let students in the audience see that they too could have the chance to go to college and get a scholarship. You know, in many rural communities, the scholarship's the athlete. So celebrating all scholarships the same way you celebrate the athletic scholarship starts to break down barriers. But the biggest advice I would have is just to be present. But to be present in meaningful ways, not to be present in the newspaper. One of the things that I've enjoyed most is work that I've done in elementary schools, where I would go month after month after month, year after year after year, building relationships. And if any one of the students that we built a relationship with ultimately went to college 12 years later because some guy showed up and read books to their first grade class every month, then we touched one life.
So here's a question that I ask every one of my guests, and I'd like to ask you, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
I think when my family moved to Johnson City, Tennessee, and I had the chance to talk to the former president about the university and what it would be like to live here, because I had never lived in a town this small. And he said, Brian, I'll tell you this. You'll find after you've been here for a while that when you live in a community in which the worst traffic you're going to have to navigate is from 12 to 12:20 on a Sunday, you've found that you've moved to a good community. When you've found that you can go into a restaurant and you know a third of the people sitting there, when you found that you go into a grocery store and it takes you an hour and a half to buy milk because everyone wants to stop and talk to you, you found you've moved to a good community, because you've moved to a community where you have a chance to be a part of something bigger than you and make a difference. That happens in rural communities every day. And it's not just to university presidents. If you're the high school basketball coach in rural high school in a rural community, you are more than a coach. You're a parent, you're an advisor, you're a mentor, you're a role model. The rural advantage is the opportunity to make a difference in a meaningful way in something larger than you could in an urban area where you're just one of thousands. If you're willing to give your service and career to a rural community, you're going to touch people in ways that you can't in bigger places. And it'll change your life more than it'll change theirs.
That's one of the best answers I've had yet.
Well, I wasn't expecting the question, so that was an honest answer.
So, Dr. Noland, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure you're highlighting, either about the work that you're doing at ETSU or about your students or about your commitment to ensuring that rural communities are revitalized and healthy?
I think just thank you for the work that you're doing to spotlight the great work that occurs across the country. For so many people, when they think of higher education, it's Harvard, Princeton, it's the University of Tennessee. It's the big schools that are either at the elite level or the big schools that play big time football. But that's not higher education. The bulk of American higher education are the public regional universities whose focus is on educating people in the communities that they come from, that they return to. And, just thank you for spotlighting the work that's occurring at places like University of Central Arkansas, East Tennessee State University, Glenville State, Henderson State, Alcorn State. Pick the state, pick the divisional state entity. Those are the institutions that are really driving change and innovation. They don't make the newspaper and they don't get a lot of press coverage, but they're the schools that have made our nation run, and they're the schools that will continue to make our nation run. So thanks for putting a spotlight on places such as ETSU.
Well, I really appreciate and thank you for spending some time with me today. You've given us some really great insights around how higher education can really be a key factor in solving some of those rural education challenges in our communities. So appreciate the time that we've been able to spend together.
Thanks. Thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to The Rural Scoop. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. And be sure to follow on Twitter at Dr. Sadorf. That's Dr_SADORF, so that you never miss a new release. You can also check out previous episodes of The Scoop wherever you get your podcasts. Production support for The Rural Scoop is provided by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education.